Welcome into episode 327 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue, Scott McLaughlin, and we are also joined today by Chris Peters. Chris is the senior content creator for Flow Hockey. He's an NHL draft and prospect analyst. Chris, thank you for coming on with us. We talked to you a few years ago. A lot has changed since then. A lot of prospects we talked about back then that have now gone on to become NHLers, and it's cyclical. And here we go again. I know you have a busy week with the draft and you're in Vegas. So thanks for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, hey, the Bruins are back in the first round, so I guess all of a sudden I become a little bit more relevant in Boston, which I'm not too worried about. That's great. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's great to have a reason to have Chris back on because Bruins have not been in the first round in a couple of years. There's been diminished interest in the draft because of that, and obviously they haven't had a ton of top prospects because of that. So a chance potentially to get one at 25 if they hold on to this pick, which I think they're going to, but we'll see. Obviously they could trade it. Chris, I actually wanted to start with just sort of bigger picture. Picking at 25, is that a good spot to be? Is this like a stronger than usual, weaker than usual? Just sort of what's your feel for how this draft board looks?
Yeah, I think most drafts are similar in this range of the draft. I think that you're getting the same kind of players where they're not guaranteed top 4, top 6 guys, but they have some traits that are project to be closer to the top of the lineup. And so I think when you're drafting in the mid 20s, you're getting the lower tier of that first round. You're getting guys that are going to be closer to the value of what you can also find in the second round. So it's not like you're getting, 25 is not a place where you necessarily pick stars, but every once in a while there's like a David Pasternak down there and it works out, pretty well. So there's always potential. I mean, being in the first round, being able to probably get, one of the guys that's very high on your list is a huge value to your scouting staff and then also to the future of your franchise. So no matter who they pick here, I think the value is going to be good. But in terms of what it looks like, you're not getting the depth of like the 2019 draft and different things where, we saw a lot more star potential in some of those players. I think once you get past the top 14 of this draft, there's a bit of a gap, and then there's the next group, and then there's maybe a little bit more of a gap again. And then as you get into the 25-32 range, you're talking about negligible difference between the guys that you're going to get at the bottom of the first round and the guys you get in the top of the second round. But in the end, the likelihood of the player that you pick at 25 becoming an NHL player is a lot higher than the players that you do pick in the mid second, the late second, early third round. So to be back in the first round in any draft is good. I think in this draft, the way that the board is setting up, the Bruins are going to have some really good options to pick guys that fit their profile of player. So I think that that's the other thing that is the benefit of having a first rounder in this year's draft.
Yeah, the last time you were on with us, we were talking about Fabian Lysell because it was his draft. It was talking about, who could fall to the Bruins at that pick, once again in the 20s. And sure enough, you talked about how you thought that he was a good player, but people might not have liked his consistency. And then he ends up in Boston. And you were right. He did fall to them there. This year, I have a similar question. Like, is there anyone in the group that you have maybe in the top 20 that you see maybe could fall to a place like Boston at 25 that, maybe some teams aren't as high on or there's consistency issues, but that you think it's a player that could really pan out if they end up in Boston?
Yeah, there's a number of players that I'm just very curious to see, ultimately how high they end up going. And, I think kind of toward, at least in the top 20 of my list, the guy that's 20th is Trevor Connolly, which is a player that's got a lot of controversy surrounding him this year. Teams have made, I've talked to a lot of teams that won't draft him. He had some troubles in his past. He's committed to go to Providence, and he's been trying to prove to teams that he's changed and that, but there's still evidence of maturity issues and decision-making on the ice. But he, and if he falls, you have to have that discussion. The Bruins obviously have gone through the situation with Mitchell Miller. This is not that. Like, I don't feel like what we've seen Mitchell Miller there was like a criminal activity that was involved in that whole thing. Trevor Connolly hasn't committed any crimes, but there are certainly allegations from his past that give people pause, and some incidents and that, are still kind of floating around there. So I think if you're Boston and you went through the Mitchell Miller experience, you might not be willing to do that. But I'm just saying the reason I'm bringing him up is because players like that have this high skill and incredible potential, they're more likely to be available there. And you have to have the discussion, because I think he is a top 20 talent and a top 15 talent on talent. So you have to have that discussion. And I wonder where the Bruins would fall if he is available there, because I think that would be the highest value you could get in terms of on-ice component. But, you're obviously making other decisions. So non-controversial.
Yes, because I don't know if Boston's going to try to go that route again, because it did not go well. That was
right. I just wanted to bring it up. To bring it up because I think that's the discussion that teams in this range are going to continue to have. But a guy who's not in my top 20, but is very close to it, is Sasha Boisvert from the Muskegon Lumberjacks. And he is a two-way goal-scoring center. And he's got some size. He's got a little bit of nastiness to his game. He's just not physically strong yet. As he gets physically stronger, he's going to be a lot more effective in that two-way game. He's a player that I like for Boston in this range if he's going to be there. There's no guarantee that he will. But if he's going to be around in that range, that's a player that I think fits kind of what they do. They've obviously had some success drafting out of the USHL in the past. So that's another guy there. There will be a couple of Russians in the range as well. Some teams are going to be letting some of those second tier Russians that aren't Ivan Demidov or Anton Salayev be, options. And so there's guys like Igor Chernyshov, who's a highly skilled guy, Nikita Artemanov, who is another skilled, good work ethic kind of player. Those are players that you could potentially get some value. And then in terms of defensemen too, because I've only been bringing up forwards, guys that I have in that range, EJ Emery from the National Team Development Program and Charlie Ellick. Both guys are right shot, defensive, more defensive minded, but elite skaters with size. And so you think about some of the things that Boston could use in their system. Well, they can use pretty much everything, right? So you're trying to find those values. I think both of those guys fit the profile of Bruins players, but also have a chance to be there at 25.
Yeah, I like Boisvert, Mount St. Charles product. Speaking of Rhode Island connections, you mentioned a player that I'm increasingly finding myself falling in love with a bit, and that's Nikita Artemanov. Chris, I don't know if you look into things like NHLE, which is a formula that tries to project, if a player is going to make the NHL or be a star. He rates very highly in that formula. He's actually top 5 player in the draft. And he was playing in the KHL. He was playing in Russia's top pro league and had 23 points in 54 games. I saw your write-up on him on Flow Hockey, where you noted that that puts him 7th all-time in the KHL among his age peers. So why might he be available at 25? Why is he not going higher?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that in general, the Russian players are, they're making guys a little gun shy. He's under contract until 2025, 26, which isn't, that's a pretty reasonable contract term for a guy. He is a late birth date, so he's a little bit older for the draft class, with that as well. But, he's played the last season under Igor Larionov at Torpedo, and Larionov has let his young players. He is the anti-KHL coach, because most KHL coaches do not play young players. He overplays young players, which is awesome. And Artemanov did what, rewarded him with good shifts. He's got a great work ethic. He battles, he competes, he does all those different things. And then he also has that skill level. I just think that there is some question, even though he produced this year, if the skill is high end enough for him to be a driver and to be a guy that can do that. I have him as a first rounder. I think that more projections are putting him in the second round as an availability there. But I think that's a player to me that carries quite a bit of value. It's not like he's terribly undersized or anything like that. He's not 6 foot. So, you know, I mean, like, I guess take that for what it's worth. Teams are definitely considering that when you look at him versus like an Igor Chernyshov or a Yegor Surin, you know, the guys that are a little bit bigger. But I just think that he's tenacious and gives a team a chance with his shifts because he's going to provide effort on top of skill.
This is all great information, Chris, if the Bruins do indeed utilize that 25th pick to select somebody. Obviously, this past week, the Bruins traded Linus Ullmark to Ottawa, who's a former Vezina winner, one half of an elite goalie tandem. And I think when you have a fan base and a franchise that's perpetually in win now mode, I think Bruins fans are like, okay, great, but a late first round pick is not helping us in this upcoming season, and it's a glorified second round pick. And I don't know if I totally agree with that's a little harsh, but I think a lot of people are potentially hoping for a shoe to drop, and it's great that Bruins got back first round collateral. Okay, can they try to package that to either move up in the draft this year or maybe package that with some other pieces to potentially bring in a top center outside of free agency via a hockey trade? How valuable to teams around the league would that 25th overall pick be in a potential package? Do teams look at that and say, I don't know, like not really? Or is there much leverage there for the Bruins to use that pick? Is it really that sought after?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that in general, a low first is a sweetener as opposed to a, more of, if you're going to make an impactful trade, if you're going to make a trade that is going to materially change your everyday lineup for the better, and probably I think if you are trading a first, your preference would be to trade it for somebody that's going to be there for a little bit as well. So you're looking for somebody with term. Those trades are harder to make as well because of the NHL being what it is. So I think it as part of a package, it's certainly an attractive. It's more than a sweetener, really. It is a featured kind of thing, and there's still a lot of value. The thing about that pick and any pick at the draft is the value dramatically changes to a team, not necessarily to the public, but to a team based on their board. And if they have somebody that they are desperate to get, and they have, but those trades are hard to do because they have to happen almost in the moment. They have to happen within a time period. You probably have an idea going in, like the strategy is if Boston is still on the clock, or if this guy is still there and Boston is picking and we have something that we want to trade, we'll make the call. And I'm sure there are some little preliminary discussions that happen before a draft too, where it's like, hey, what's it going to take, to get 25? What's it going to take to get whatever player? And so you start having those conversations earlier. So they don't really happen, in that immediate moment. Like there's work done and legwork done prior to that. But, I think for NHL teams, the picks that carry the most value are going to be the ones earlier in the draft. And the fact of the matter is you have the Devils and the Sabres that potentially have those big bargaining chips of top 10 picks or top 11 picks. And that obviously, creates a bit more competition where that 25th overall doesn't look as enticing for an everyday roster player. But it's not impossible. It's just, I don't think that that's the kind of pick that's going to fetch, a top 6 center or without something, significant also attached to it. So, or of relative significance attached to it.
You mean like if they flip it? Like they're not going to flip that for a top 6 forward, is what you're saying.
Right. If it's a straight up
with
trade,
something else. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So,
okay.
Well, I mean, the possibility of sorry, Bridget, the possibility of moving up too is going to be challenging in this draft as well. I think, you wouldn't be able to get a lot higher, I don't think, than the later teens or the 20s. So yeah.
Well, that's good insight for, that's something that, wasn't really on our radar because we just found about this 25th overall pick a few days ago. So like we've gone from really not paying much attention to the draft to like all in looking at prospects from the first round, late first round. I have 3 guys I want to bring up to you. I'm a Hockey East broadcaster, so these are 3 guys that are going to play in Hockey East next year. They're all centers, and they're all right in that range of late first round. So I just want to run them by you. Let me know if you think, first of all, they'll still be there, what the upside downside is for them. And I'm going to start with one that I know Scott's going to like, which is Cole Hudson, who you have projected at 25th. He will go to BU to play with, where all of his brothers have played. He is also undersized, just like them. So I'd like to get your opinion on Cole Hudson.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy watching Cole Hudson play. I'm obviously higher on him than I think the industry is. I think it's very unlikely he's going to go in the first round. I think it's very unlikely that he goes in the early second round even. And it's because, the size factor. But the thing that I like about Cole is that he's a real competitor. He played his best game, I felt, one of his best games of the season in the gold medal game at the Under-18 World Championship, where USA ended up losing on 3 straight power play goals on a major penalty. And at 5-on-5, he was outstanding. And he and EJ Emery were playing together, and they were really shutting down Canada's top players at even strength. And, I think that his defending has improved. It's not going to be the strong suit of his game because he's not big, so he can't really impose his will on anybody. But he's smart, and he moves pucks really well. And one thing that I think he added this year was a true goal scoring component to his game. He was able to get deeper into the zone and make good reads and score goals that way. And so, he's the all-time leading scorer at the National Team Development Program among defensemen, which is an incredible accomplishment when you consider who all has been there. His point total did drop significantly year over year, which I think is it's a little hard to explain, but I mean, the under-18 season can often be the harder year to produce because you're playing colleges, you're playing, a tougher schedule overall. But the fact of the matter is he still was a massive point producer and one of the leading players on his team. So I got lots of time for Cole. I think that he's going to be a very good college player. I think Lane is more dynamic in terms of his skill set, but I think Cole has maybe I say this, it's got to be close because they're both really competitive. I thought Lane's compete was always undersold. But I think, Cole, if he might have a little advantage there, so it'll be interesting to see how he pans out at college.
Do you have any comps for him besides his brother?
Not really. I think I think Torrey Krug, he's got a little more Torrey Krug in him than I think, in that kind of I'm going to get you. I'm going to try to get you, so yeah, but I think maybe that's another one.
Yeah, I've been a big believer in Lane Hudson for a long time. I thought he was a first round talent the year he got drafted. Too. And watching him at BU, I believe in him going to the NHL despite being, so small for a defenseman. I think he's gonna prove to be a first round talent going forward. And I like Cole as well, from what I know of him. It just feels to me like the Bruins and probably a lot of teams, but especially the Bruins, are shifting away from smaller kind of offensive-minded defensemen, which, on the one hand, I get, because you see this formula of teams that have the big, physical, mobile defensemen. Everyone's, 6'2" or taller. So it's I get it, but to me, there's still a place for that hyper-skilled, competitive, but undersized defenseman. It just feels to me like the Bruins aren't going to be drafting it. They let Torrey Krug walk. They're probably letting Matt Grzelcyk walk. I think last year at development camp, it was something like all but 1 or 2 of their defensemen at development camp were 6'2" or taller. There's just been this clear organizational shift.
Yeah, and when I saw Lane too in person, when we were leaving the Hockey East championship. Sorry, I also apologize that my cat showed up. I forgot to shut the door. This is Xerxes, but so he was just so small when I saw him. I knew he was, he was only 5'10", I think is what he's listed at, but I've seen other places list him at 5'8". But yeah, I mean, it was kind of striking going from an NHL locker room when you talk to Brandon Carlo to going and talking to Lane Hudson and presumably Cole in a similar size range.
Yeah, and honestly, like the whole size thing, like it's the league, it's going that way. Like they're just it's never not been about size, but it's more about it now. I feel like, and seeing both Florida and Vegas win in back-to-back years, where they didn't have many small players. Like I think Vegas only had one player under 6 foot, and it was Jonathan Marchessault who won the Conn Smythe.
Mm-hmm.
And then this past year, no defenseman under 6 feet on Florida that played regularly. So just that heavy hockey is still very much playoff hockey.
Speaking of size, look at this transition.
This is what I was just going to say too, Scott.
The other end of Com Ave, Dean Letourneau heading to BC, 6'6", 6'7" center, coming out of Canadian prep school, so not, the most traditional draft year path. Everything I read and see is, it's going to be a project, it's going to require patience. Chris, what's your read on him, and do you see him going in the first round?
Yeah, I do see him going in the first round, and based on, would it shock me if the Bruins took him at 25? Like honestly, not. I think that there's a lot of risk in the player, because he did play at a lower level relative to most players in their draft year. Did get 2 games in the USHL. I'm going to be very curious to see how he manages the transition to college hockey next year, just because it is a major jump from where he played. St. Andrews College plays a pretty heavy schedule, and they also play a lot of the top prep schools. So they'll play the Shaddocks and the Culvers and the teams that you're familiar with in the U.S. Midwest prep school area, and some of the teams out in New York and things like that. But it's going to be a big jump. And so the thing that's really fascinating about, 6'6.5", close enough to 6'7". Not a lot of guys like that. Tage Thompson clearly is an example for that. But when you're that big and you have the hands that he does, and he has really good hands, he's got a good shot, he's got, a goal scorer's mentality. It goes a long way. I mean, the big thing that, scouts want to see from him, they want to see him be more consistently competitive, more aggressive, using his frame even more effectively. But I think he's a mature kid. I think there's a lot to like about him, in just kind of his approach. And, I think for BC, I would say be patient if you're an Eagles fan too, because I think there's going to be an adjustment period for him. But at that frame, it buys you a lot of leeway, and it buys you a lot of, kind of wiggle room to struggle. And even on your worst night, you're impacting the game just because you're so huge out there. So I think that's going to be a player that does go in the first round, especially in the later first round when teams are a little bit more willing to take those swings, possibly to a team that's had multiple first rounders. It's going to be very interesting to see where he ultimately lands, but a very intriguing player, one of the more fascinating ones of the draft.
And I think really fascinating, before we let you go here, more fascinating in the Boston area because he's coming to BC. But I think that Don Sweeney, likes to draft players that go into those programs because BC seems like a good place for him to develop, a place that Don Sweeney can trust that he'll develop the right way, because that's just how BC works. And he can, go to all the games. I see him at Hockey East games all the time. So that just seems like, it almost feels like a very natural fit there. And I think if he's available there, that could be a really good option for them, because they need size and they need a center. So
Chris, we know you have to go, so I'm just going to ask you for a quick one-word answer on this. Fabian Lysell, you called him a top 10 talent in his draft year. Obviously hasn't broken through to the NHL yet. Yes or no, he'll be a top 9 forward for the Bruins in the next season or two, or at least in the NHL. Does he break through at some point?
I'm going to say no.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then the three of us will expand upon that answer after we let you go.
Here, I got time. I'll expand on it. I'll expand on it, just because the thing with Fabian is that no one questions the talent, the skill, the ability that he has. I think it's really got to come down to between the ears and finding the way to impact games beyond that. And I think that he'll show that. I think in the AHL, there's evidence that there are flashes of that player. You can see it. You can see it enough. The situation is that he's not a big guy. The NHL is a hard, heavy game. You have to be committed in all elements of the game in order to make an impact and to get a coach to trust you. And I think that's been his issue post-draft, really, is that, getting coaches to say, I can trust this guy in a lot of different situations. I just think that the threshold is so high to reach the NHL that it'll be tougher for him to do it at a level that is, top 6, top 9. So I could certainly be wrong. A big summer for any prospect can sometimes lead to a significant change in game or in size or in, kind of things click. And also there's a maturity element to him as well. Once he gets a little bit older and has an understanding, hey, this isn't working, but it'll be interesting to see if it does happen. I don't necessarily know if it'll be with the Bruins, because I think that he was such an off-brand pick for them, which I liked. I liked it in the moment because let's take a bet on skill. We don't have enough of that in our organization. Let's get a big high skill or a high skill player. And I think they did that. So I think he's a player that is worth being patient on. And that's what I'll say. I think that I still have some belief. It's not as strong as it was in his draft year, but I still have some belief. And also, he was a COVID year draft guy. It's kind of, we've seen a lot of those players. Some are Wyatt Johnston, some are not, most are not, so that's just the kind of way it goes. But I'm he's still a fascinating player to me, and that skill is so tantalizing. You just hope he puts it together.
I would say he's fascinating to most Boston people as well, because it's like he's teetering. It's like, is he coming? Is he going to be this big savior or a letdown, or, and especially since they haven't drafted in the first round since then, it's kind of all we have to talk about in terms of prospects besides like Patra and Laura, who actually, jumped over him and play now. So we will let you go.
I think health is a big factor for him too going forward.
True.
So
Yeah,
absolutely, Chris. We appreciate all of your time and enjoy draft weekend. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks a lot, Chris. Really appreciate it.
All right. Once again, thanks again to Chris Peters for joining us. So, Bridget and Scott, I think we want to stick to what we were talking about with regard to Fabian Lysell. And obviously, I asked Chris if he thinks Fabian will be a top 9 forward for the Bruins. I also kind of added, or just at the NHL level in general at some point. And the jury's ultimately still out. And I think that a lot has gone against Lysell in the last couple of years. He's had recurring concussion issues and injury issues, and that certainly does not help one's development. You combine that with a little bit of immaturity between the ears at times, and a reluctancy to take to coaching as far as learning to not try to do everything yourself. And I think he improved at that at points last year. But, at the end of the day, it all adds up to, again, he's going to enter a training camp this year where he has a job to earn, and it doesn't seem like he's a favorite right now. So I guess we'll just start there and what your expectations could be for the player going forward.
Yeah, I think that last thing that Chris said and that you kind of just touched on about, one summer can change a lot for a young player. And I think it really highlights how important this summer is for Fabian Lysell. Like last year, I had him on the podcast, we talked about it. He lost a big chunk of the summer to the concussion issues that ended his season. He returned he did have another injury late in the season this year, upper body, not concussion. But he returned from that in the playoffs, and by all accounts should have a relatively normal summer. And I think how much he improves and gets stronger, faster, all of it, just how much goes into his training and what he comes back as. Not necessarily, I don't even know if he's going to be at development camp. He's probably graduated out of that, but training camp in September, when that comes around, where he is then is going to be fascinating to see, because last year, remember, like, he had kind of a quiet training camp, quiet preseason. He was one of the earlier cuts, which was disappointing. Everyone was hoping he at least made a serious push to make the team out of camp, and he really didn't. So you definitely want to see that this year. Like, you need to see a real big step, like almost a jump forward, and see him seriously push for a spot. It's gonna be fascinating to see if he's done that and if he's put himself in position to do that.
Yeah, and I'm sure we will try to get another interview with him this offseason if we can. Like, we'll put in for that to see if we can have him reflect on last season and the different summer he's had this year compared to last summer, when he kind of told Scott about how difficult it was to recover and get ready. So this could be a really big off season for him. First of all, try to get bigger, try to rehab, try to work on things that maybe he had talked to Scott about this too. Like, sometimes the season is stressful and you don't get to work on all of the things you want to because you're going through games and practice, and then there's specific things that you can fine tune in the off season. So I think it's interesting too, because the off season, whether he makes a big jump or not, we should be able to tell when preseason starts. And the funny thing is, we've been sitting here since pretty much the end of the season saying the Bruins are in desperate need of at least one, probably two top six forwards. And this is a guy who had that upside when he was drafted, but he's not a guy that we really have in the conversation at this point. And that's just because he hasn't shown it yet. So I can't even imagine him being a fourth line forward. Just that doesn't seem like his fit. So like, when you asked Brian about is he going to be a top 9 forward in the league? And he said no. I was like, well, he's not going to be a fourth liner probably for pretty much anyone. It doesn't really work for him. So if he makes the NHL, it's going to have to be in one of those high skilled roles, probably a top 6 role, because that's just what he is. He's not a grinder. He's not like taking pucks to the boards and bumping guys up. Like, he's a skill player. So when the Bruins are in this position where they drafted what was supposed to be a top 6 forward, and he hasn't panned out to be that quite yet, still in his early 20s, but this would have been a perfect time for him to jump into the roster because there's a need and there's an opening.
Yeah. And if you're one who's reading between the lines, that's exactly what my question essentially was to Chris is he going to be an NHL player or not? Because exactly like you said, Bridget, that's kind of the prerequisite that he's not going to be a fourth liner. Right. And, as you look at the Bruins right now, you are looking at a team that, there's opportunity there. There's absolutely opportunity there. I mean, Jake DeBrusk is likely going to walk, just based on kind of gut feeling. So there's a middle 6, top 6 talent right there,
and not just on gut feeling either. It's like from what we'd heard, there wasn't even conversations going on at the end of the season. So it's normally really not a great sign. That's what happened with Torrey Krug when he left. So,
and we don't know what Don's going to do. Less than a week from now with free agency, he's going to go out there and Scott, I think Scott mentioned it last episode. Like, he does have to set aside about $8 million of the salary cap that they have right now for a Swayman contract, which we know is imminent. And so you can't just go out there and pay for a top center and pay for a top 6 wing and then pay for, 2 third liners. And it's, you can't buy an entire, all your needs through free agency, unfortunately, with the fact that you have to pay Swayman. So, could the Bruins go out there and get a top center potentially, and then maybe, like an Anthony Duclair and a Toffoli or something? And maybe, but maybe they go out and get a top center and a top 6 wing, and then that third line you have openings with Frederick and Brazeau and whomever. So Geeky. So I think you mentioned last year Lysell was kind of coming back. If he doesn't come into training camp this year and really impress, he's kind of running low on on not excuses, but valid reasoning, I think, at this point, at 21, almost 22 years old.
Yeah, I guess I never really fully give up on a player. Like, there are players who take jumps at 22, 23, even 24, but again, you need to see progress. Like, what would be super discouraging to me is if he is quiet again in a couple preseason games in camp, and he doesn't even come close to making the final cuts. Like that's what would start to get me to think like, boy, we might really be running out of time here. I think if you see progress and he puts together a strong camp preseason, but still doesn't make the team because there's just too many guys ahead of him, like that's fine. I'm not going to panic over that. Like, would I love to see him just grab a job and run with it? Of course, that's best case scenario for everyone. But, I'm more in the camp of like, I just need to see progress. Like, I'm not expecting, I don't think he's ever going to be a star at this point, but can he be a middle six winger? Like, that to me should still be in play, but you need to see him keep taking steps towards it and not plateau.
Well, how old was Brad Marchand when he debuted in the National Hockey League? I think he was like 23. And so, I'm not suggesting to give up on the player if he doesn't, make the team this year in camp. I'm just saying, to your point, Scott, like if he doesn't have an impressive camp, I can't see why he can't have an impressive camp at least, and then give the Bruins a tough decision to make. And yes, like if it's not this year, there's still time, sure, but I do think all eyes are going to be on him, and I think he has to own up to that fact.
The thing with him aging, and not being brought up yet to Boston, and say he's not brought up again next season, the issue becomes like with the player in their mind, can I go somewhere else where I can play? And so then you kind of start to see maybe a little bit of a hey, maybe can you deal me? Like, you know what I mean? Like a fracture with where a player thinks they should be versus a team thinks they should be can kind of get frustrating and different. And sometimes you see that. We've seen it happen with Bruins prospects in the past. Like I'd say like Jack Stanika probably falls into that. It's like, okay, I want to play, but the Bruins aren't playing me. And just guys like that who maybe see themselves differently than an organization does. Or maybe
now with the Winnipeg Jets are going to be trading Rucker McGroarty because he thinks he's NHL ready. They weren't ready to sign him or guarantee him a pro roster spot. And so, he's their top prospect and they're going to be trading him.
Scott, I wish you could see the tab that's open on my computer right now, because it's literally his name. And I was going to bring him up to you guys because of what you just talked about. And look, he's a winger, but I mean, should the Bruins be, in on that? Like, again, do the Bruins have what other teams want? That's the question.
Yeah, you have to at least poke around. Like, you have to see what they're looking for and what the package is going to be, because that's happening fast. That's probably happening before the draft. So that's happening possibly as we speak, like, or within the next couple days.
Like, I want to, like, we're planning on posting this in the morning, but like at the same time, I'm sitting here going, Bruins could trade their draft pick in the next few hours, and then we're like, it doesn't. So maybe we'll post it.
Yeah, maybe we do just post it right away.
Yeah, because I don't trust it after all the stuff that's happened.
It would be the skate pod way, wouldn't it? It'd be the skate pod way.
Yeah, so, like 4 p.m. When whatever day today is, Wednesday. Yeah. Like 4 p.m. Bruins package 25th overall and Fabian Lysell for something. It's like the entire podcast is gone. Like
useless, totally useless. Yeah, I'm posting this right away. So to get, now that like we've talked about Lysell, the other part of it, like you just mentioned, was the 25th overall pick, which was the main conversation we were having with Chris. And we did have some takeaways, which, like, we were talking last podcast in the immediate aftermath of the Ullmark trade, where we find out the Bruins get this pick. We're talking about flipping it. And I think a lot of fans have that in their mind too. Like, hey, maybe they flip the pick. Maybe they flip Korpisalo. And Chris kind of put a damper on that, saying it's not going to be as easy because, first of all, teams aren't as interested in a 25th overall pick, so it's not going to get you a top 6 forward, was what he said. And it's also going to be harder to trade up in the draft, which is, I think, is something Scott had brought up last podcast. So I just wanted your thoughts on that, because that seemed like it was a bigger possibility, or at least, on the table possibility. I'm sure it still is, but when you understand the difficulty of it, you kind of convince yourself that they probably will be drafting in that 25 spot.
Yeah, and especially because, when it comes to trading up, like a lot of times what happens is, maybe you move up 10 spots and you give up your first and third to do it, or first and second if you're moving up higher, or whatever. Well, the Bruins don't have a second or third rounder. Like, their next pick's not until the 4th round. So trading 25 and a 4th round pick doesn't really move you up much at all. Like, teams probably aren't even going to pick up the phone on that. So in terms of like how the Bruins can move up, they just don't really have a lot of ways to do it. You know, like maybe they can go up a few spots if there's one specific player they like and, you know, they're worried he's not going to fall 3 more picks or whatever. But it doesn't really seem like they have a way to move way up the board, like 10 plus picks.
I mean, I think, and don't misconstrue this as me suggesting this, but I think, and Bruins fans wouldn't want to hear this, but I think the only way, because the first round pick the Bruins have is so low in the round, the only way that you are gonna package a 25th overall pick to a team for a return that is massive, I would say, or certainly very significant, would be if probably Mason Lohrei is in that package, right? Because you're not gonna get, you know, a top line center, let's say, without giving up something that you value extremely high, which, let's be honest, it's not the 25th overall pick. So I think, and because the Bruins don't really have any other major assets, prospects to speak of. I mean, Matt Poitras's another one. I mean, like, again, I'm not suggesting to trade Lohrei or Poitras, but if the Bruins want to put a package together that's worth a damn, it's probably one of those two in a first round pick. I think that's just the reality. Whether Bruins fans want to, whether they like that or not, it doesn't matter. That's what it would be. You'd have to give to that. So if the Bruins want to go that route, I would get used to the idea of probably one of those names in a package with that first round pick, whether it's now or a future trade deadline or whomever, because, or, you know, until they get a prospect pipeline that's really, really high end, you got few to choose from.
Yeah, and that just feels pretty unlikely to me. Like it would have to be something that's really gonna blow them away if you're throwing, you know, Lohrei or Poitras into it. Like you know, like even if you look like, okay, trying to target, like that would have to be like for, you know, a contributor now. Like if you're including those guys to get a top 2 center now,
and they would have to be someone kind of young.
Certainty. Yeah.
You know, you want someone young that's like a sure thing. And that would, first of all, your few prospects that you did draft, that you did hit on, like the only like homegrown guys recently that you have to like hang your hat on, they're gone now, right? And the pick. So then you're depleting everything even more. So I think that you'd have to like that person more, like significantly more than you like a free agent that you can sign that's available. And the contract would have to be decent, and it would, you know, it'd have to be like the perfect situation for that to make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is no blockbuster hockey trade that doesn't come with a gamble and a risk for both teams involved. And, you know, I think a perfect example is the Florida Panthers. Now, Matthew Tkachuk was publicly on his way out of Calgary, right? So I think, but at the end of the day, the Panthers won a President's Trophy, and then that summer traded their highest scoring forward and their top defenseman, arguably, in Mackenzie Weegar, for Matthew Tkachuk. Huberdeau and Weegar go to Calgary. Tkachuk goes to Florida, and then they go to back-to-back cups and obviously win the second one. So, like, there's a huge risk by sending not only Huberdeau, but especially Weegar, who was your top all-around defenseman, to another team. And yeah, you're bringing in Tkachuk, who's a culture changer, but it's a gamble. It's a risk. So, you know, it's, again, I would echo Scott's sentiment, and I think you're probably there too, Bridget, which is it's just unlikely. I don't think they're gonna. I think they'll probably end up using that 25th overall pick. Now, does that change my opinion on the Ullmark return, where you had to eat $3 million of Korpisalo? Yeah, it does make me sour a bit on that element of the deal. if that was the only way to get a first round pick, because I don't know what a 25th overall pick really does for you this year or next. So again, we'll wait and see. I've been saying that all along. If they end up using the 25th pick, I certainly don't like the Ullmark return necessarily, because again, you didn't alleviate all the cap space that Ullmark was carrying on your books. You replaced that with $3 million of Korpisalo and almost $1 million of Kostelic. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of in a wait and see mode right now, but I'm souring on it a little bit here.
I mean, if you make the pick, then really the trade became more about the future than the present, because as we said, you only freed up in the end like 1.15 or whatever it is. We did the math the other day. Then it becomes, what does that pick become? And like, that can probably be frustrating for fans who wanted, everything to be about this offseason, freeing up money and going to spend. That said, like, you do still always have to be planning for the future too. Like, you can't just always be in win now mode. Eventually that runs out. Like, you do have to have prospects. You do have to have a next wave. You do have to have young talent, young cheap talent, to help fill roster holes in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And you can fill some of those with third, fourth round picks and college free agent signings like the Bruins have, but you're mostly getting bottom of the roster guys in those spots. Like, the chances of a third, fourth round pick or a college free agent signing turning into top 6 forward or top 4 defenseman is pretty slim. So you have to be high in the draft to get those kind of players.
Now,
yeah,
the concern with the salary cap, them getting Korpisalo and it hitting their cap and talking about only freeing up just over $1 million becomes spending power, because like one way to make this offseason look like a big win would be, you make the trade that you have to make. You, instead of getting nothing for Ullmark, you get this. Maybe you get a prospect you really like. Maybe in the future the trade looks better because the guy that you drafted just turns out to be a stud, and you're like, wow, we wouldn't have had him if we let Ullmark play in Boston and leave in free agency after the end of this season. So, but if they have enough spending power left to add, if somehow they can add a Stamkos or a Getzel or like one of these big forward names that are free agents this offseason that are going to be hard to get, because they're especially Getzel is going to be very hard to get, because the money he's going to require to attract him to your team is going to be high. Would you still consider this like a big offseason win? Does this trade look better to you if it's like, okay, no, Don Sweeney did what he had to do over here, and he had a totally separate plan for that free agent forward signing that did not involve a trade?
I just have to compartmentalize, because overall, yes, like the offseason can still be a win. I guess, and I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm wondering why, like, did the Bruins have to? Because I'm with you, Scott. Like, you have to think about the future as well. So I'm not suggesting not to go after a first round pick, but in talking with people, people corresponding with us online, and just having a couple more days to mull it over, I'm wondering why, like Ullmark should have been worth the 25th pick and 1-for-1. I'm wondering why, why did it take bringing on Korpisalo and trading a former Vezina winner, like, to a team that needs a number one goalie? Yeah, everybody knows the Bruins have to get rid of one of the goalies, but Ottawa needed a goalie. And I've seen people say that, the Bruins should have gotten and I think you also said this, Scott, like the Bruins should have gotten at least a second round pick or something just to take on Korpisalo's contract. So I'm just wondering why they couldn't.
The Red Wings just dumped Jake Wallman's contract to San Jose and had to throw in a second round pick for San Jose to do it, and got nothing in return. It was just a straight contract dump. So it's like, okay, so just dumping Korpisalo alone was a second round pick. That's the going rate for dumping a contract.
Right.
So throwing in Linus Ullmark, who won the Vezina 2 years, only upgraded you from a second rounder to 25th overall. Like that's all. That's the only upgrade he was worth. It just seems kind of crazy to me.
And that criticism on the return, especially now that I'm convincing myself through talking with you guys and Chris that the Bruins are going to use that 25th pick, you know, that return, it's like, I think it's fair to question Sweeney's negotiation ability there to get strong armed by Ottawa. I think it's fair. I absolutely think it's fair because Ullmark was the best NHL player in the deal, obviously. Now, the Senators got his rights for 1 year, and I believe that the sentiment is that Ullmark is willing to play out his contract. So I don't think it's a guarantee that he's going to sign an extension with Ottawa. So that's a gamble for them. And also, Ullmark hasn't played. You know, he's been splitting time with Swayman, right? So if you're the Senators, you're like, okay, is he going to be how's his play going to be when he has a true number one workload? So there's questions from Ottawa's perspective, but still, I think that, like, yeah, I definitely think the Bruins should have gotten a first round pick, but it's the Korpisalo piece to me that makes no sense. And if it's because the Bruins wanted Korpisalo because they wanted like a veteran backup that they can fix, that's, to me, as opposed to Bussy, to me, that's a total misjudgment, and that is where I just philosophically disagree with them.
They didn't want Korpisalo, and like they're gonna say they did because obviously they have to. Like, he's here, you can't. Don Sweeney can't go in front of the media and be like, "Well, yeah, we didn't want him, but I guess we had to take him." So they're gonna say it, and some people will spin it that way. They didn't want him. Period.
So then he got strong armed. Then he got out negotiated. He got his bluff was called more than Ottawa's, and to me, that's where I think criticism is fair, because I think it's very simple. I think it's very simple to look Ottawa in the eyes and say, "You guys want a number one goalie or not? Do you want a number one goalie or do you not?" And as opposed to Ottawa being like, "Do you want to unload Ullmark or not?" Like, I think the Bruins had the leverage, or they should have had the leverage, and so. I just think it's fair to question why Sweeney got strong-armed and not Ottawa. I'm blanking on who their GM is.
Steve Staios.
Steve Staios, thank you. Yeah, I think it's his first offseason too, right?
Year. Yeah, his first offseason.
It's like, oh, everybody's talking about, Staios is going to win his first deal. Why does that have to come at the expense of Sweeney? It's like, I think that is fair to question why the Bruins ended up being on the low ground and negotiating instead of Ottawa when Ottawa needs a number one goalie. It's very simple in my mind.
The answer is the contract. Like, the answer is the 1 year contract. Like, and Ullmark seeming to want to be able to make his own decision about where he goes in the offseason next year. So like Ullmark being in control, and kind of forced their hand to have a less a deal that was worth less, like, than if he had 2 years or if he was willing to sign an extension.
But they had 2 first-round picks, right? So it's like, okay, fine. So we're going to take 25, not 7 overall. You know what I mean? Like it's the Korpisalo piece to me that makes no sense. Like, Ullmark for 25, which is everybody keeps saying is like kind of a glorified second-round pick. That seems pretty legit. Like, I don't see who's losing there.
So the thing with the Korpisalo piece is just that clearly Boston sees something in him and doesn't think it's like a complete, dump, like a contract dump onto them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have taken it on in the first place. So there's a lot of risk involved in Boston's side of the deal, because you have to make use of the draft pick the right way, and you have to be able to rehabilitate the goalie. And those are two things that nobody knows if those are going to work out for Boston's favor. So then you're left with, okay, because there's still so much uncertainty left on those two things, which we will know one of the answers, we'll know who they draft. We won't know if they turn out to be anything for years. We might not know what's going to happen with Korpisalo even after one season. Like, he's still got 3 years left on his deal. It's going to be a long time before we know whether or not this, in hindsight, is actually good. But I think, to bring it back to what Scott said, it was a move for the future, because like if we're not going to see the rewards of Korpisalo being rehabilitated this season. Like, he's not helping you win a cup this season. The draft pick isn't helping you win a cup this season. So that's why it's something of the future, and not to like leave out Kastelik, but he's a depth forward, and maybe he's a piece that you use in the playoffs or whatnot, but he's not single-handedly making your chance of winning the cup better this year either. So this is all going to be determined in the future, and which is what's frustrating about it, because people wanted a player they could watch now help the team now.
Yeah, we like barely talked about Kastelik in the last episode. I know we touched on him, obviously, I do think people are gonna like watching him. Like, I do think people are gonna like his game. He's a fourth liner, so as you said, he's not a make or break player, but he's very physical. He'll drop the gloves. He's really good on faceoffs. He's 56% in his career, and he has some speed. It's weird. It's like I saw like some people saying like, oh, he's it's just kind of like a lumbering fourth liner, and that's really not accurate. The Senators in 2023 held like their own team skills competition in front of season ticket holders, and he won the fastest skater. And not that the Senators are like one of the fastest teams in the league, but if you're the fastest skater on an NHL team, you've got some pretty decent wheels. So I actually think he does fill some needs in the bottom six. And, as it relates to free agency coming up, well, it might mean Pat Maroon's not back. Like, they bring some of the same stuff in terms of, as I mentioned, the physicality, willing to drop the gloves, stick up for teammates, all that. Kastelik's 11 years younger and much faster. So we all saw, as much as everyone loves Pat Maroon, how slow he is at this point in his career. And I also, the money aspect of it, I also wonder if Danton Heinen's definitely gone now, because I figure it probably takes $2 to $3 million to keep him. He definitely played himself into a nice raise over league minimum, probably at least doubling that. Not saving as much money in the Ullmark trade as I think we all thought they were going to. Like, that might mean you can't spend $2 million on Danton Heinen, especially because you have holes higher in the lineup that you have to fill with more expensive players.
I also see Danton Heinen as potentially being a guy that could take a team-friendly deal because he just wants to be, like, this might be where he wants to be and not really want to be anywhere else. Obviously money talks, but when you found a fit here that you like and you feel like you're getting the playing time rather than being a guy that's like in and out of the lineup somewhere else, but you're getting paid more, like you have decent like ice time here, maybe you take a team-friendly deal because you like your situation rather than because you want to go for as much money as you can go for. So that's just a possibility too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's one thing if we are done talking about this whole prospect, trade, all of it, I know Brian wanted to talk about something that he just tweeted about right before we started filming this. So, Brian, it's an exciting time because new jerseys are coming out, logos. Mm-hmm. So it's your fashion segment. Here we go.
Well, I think it's our fashion segment because I think the world wins here. I think the world wins. I think ultimately what happened is Adidas has been taken over by Fanatics for the NHL jersey supplier. So they rolled out their, whatever, all 32 teams as jerseys, whatever. Everybody's staying the same except for two, which is the Kings. And they went back to essentially more or less like the Wayne Gretzky era LA Kings uniforms. I think the striping is the same. The logo is more or less the same, a little bit, a little bit bolder, whatever, different crown on the inside. But to the naked eye, it's the same. And then obviously, which I think is a huge, huge win. I know a lot of people like the purple and yellow Kings jerseys of the 60s and 70s, which I also love. But I think those 90s throwbacks are also fantastic. I think it's a win-win. Either one of those, I think, is phenomenal. And then the Ducks are essentially the Mighty Ducks again. They've reverted back to their 90s Mighty Duck uniforms. The only difference, which is a big difference, but it's that it's in their current modern colors of orange, gold, and black, as opposed to purple, teal, and white, which that is like the ultimate. We all want that, but I think being realistic, we knew that wasn't going to happen. And I think with the current colors being what they are, these are the best jerseys they could have possibly rolled out. So, and as it pertains to the Bruins, they are officially going back to their pre-centennial season jerseys. I think that I'm not alone. I think a lot of people are craving for the Bruins to go back to the Bork Neely era uniforms with maybe a slight modification, but like that's more or less what people want. Everybody loved the centennial season logos. It was just the gold, I think, that kind of bothered me and a lot of people. But the Bruins are back to those jerseys. Yeah, the sparkly gold it's a no for me, dog. But the Bruins have gone
Hey,
back to
Randy.
their pre-centennial jerseys, and I think that because of the rollover to Fanatics, you had like the Kings and Ducks have been working on these jerseys for a couple of years, so they got grandfathered in. I'm not saying the Bruins. If the Bruins change their uniforms, it might just be another year or two from now, if they change them at all. So those are kind of the updates on the NHL uniforms and fashion segment is commenced, and I will throw it over to you guys.
Yeah, most importantly on the Ducks jerseys, orange now is the primary color, not black. So
Right.
love that. Just love seeing orange as a primary color. There's not a lot of that in sports. So yeah, but yeah, like everyone, I want to see purple and teal, but this really feels like the next best thing. It's certainly the best they've had since the purple and teal. On the Bruins, I did see, so Greg Wyshynski reported that Fanatics is going to be rolling out a lot of new jerseys next year. Obviously this probably hard for them. Like you said, Kings and Ducks were already working on theirs. Kind of hard to do, in your first summer first year taking over. So I do wonder if the Bruins are part of that next year, potentially, if they're going to go back to something like the Bork-Neely era. It did feel like, though, after the one-off centennial year, like that would have been kind of the natural place to change things if they were going to. But instead, it's just back to basically exactly what they had pre-centennial.
I usually let you guys handle this. I did see the video.
I was gonna say, yeah. How about Brad Marchand rolling them out? This
was my takeaway from the Bruins video that they released. It was Brad Marchand saying, "Damn, I look good in this centennial jersey," but then he has to take it off, and then he's such a good actor, and he puts the next one on for this upcoming season. And he says, "Damn, I still look good." So great acting. I think he has a career ahead of him. Maybe in LA, maybe in Broadway, Hollywood. He could be a star. We lost Brian, I believe, but I'm being a little bit sarcastic.
Yeah.
It was a bad video, but.
We got to get him in Ben Affleck or Matt Damon movie or something. Like, isn't there? I think there's a Boston movie coming this summer on Apple TV or something. Got to get him in something like that. Well,
no, there's a series coming out that follows NHL players, like a lot of the star NHL players coming up this season, and it's going to follow Pastrnak and Swayman as two of the players. I forget what it's on. Is it HBO? Is it Hulu? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I forget.
Here we go. Wait, watch this.
Oh, we're gonna have two Brians.
We pushed my luck with the Wi-Fi. I mean,
we did.
I gave it an hour.
It's okay. I think we finished talking about fashion. So, we lost them again. Wow, what a strong finish.
I'm gonna throw out one more prospect to wrap up. That'll be my final thought.
Okay.
Didn't get a chance to mention him to Chris, but Jet Luchenko, center, possibly a wing, played for Guelph, and actually took over their top line center role because Matt Poitras made the Bruins out of camp and ended up having a really productive season, 74 points in 68 games, which is actually more productive than Poitras was in his draft year. But some similarities, like 5'11", so not the biggest guy, pass first, but just considered like a really smart two-way player who makes a lot of good decisions, high hockey IQ. I wonder if obviously the Bruins had success drafting out of Guelph 2 years ago and liked the way Poitras developed there. So I wonder if they'd go back because of that familiarity, or because it's maybe somewhat of a similar profile, do you stay away and look for a different kind of player? But he's projected to go right in that range, around 25.
How big is he?
5'11".
Okay, so he's not that's right around what Poitras is, I believe.
Yeah,
he's similar size. That'd be interesting. I mean, yeah, you kind of wonder about redundancy, but hey, if you want a skilled center, I mean, if you think about what the Bruins have had at center, at their top 2 centers for the last so long, Bergeron and Krejci are both, they're not the same, but they're both really high skilled. Neither of them were huge, like we were talking about with Letourneau. Like I don't see why not take a look at them. But yeah. By the way, Brian said finish without him because he can't do the Wi-Fi. So we almost made it.
Last thing I'll say, actually, since we're talking about centers, I've seen a couple people say like they shouldn't do what they did with Beecher and just draft a center because they need a center. I actually don't think like this is similar at all, because I think there's going to be centers ranked right around there, projected around there. I think there's going to be several of them who will still be available. So if they take one of those guys, like that's not going to be a reach just because of need. Like I actually think it lines up where there's going to be some pretty good options at center around 25. If there's a defenseman or a winger who you like more and just has higher upside and all that, like by all means take the best player available. But there's a decent chance like it could be a center that's on the top of their board when they get there.
Exactly. There's a lot of centers available right in that range. And if you really like someone that other people aren't as high on, that's in the early second round, like go for it, because you don't have a second round pick to wait around and see if anyone falls to you. No one's falling to you that you like in that range, where you have your next draft pick, which is in the 4th round. So if you like a guy, you have one chance. But going for best available, usually the way to go. Very few times. I mean, unless you really have the scouting to back up a choice that you really believe in that maybe other people didn't see. But anyway, that was a good podcast. I feel like we have a better grasp on what might be coming in the draft. So that is on Friday and continues into Saturday. We'll also record hopefully Saturday night and put something up Sunday morning reacting to the draft. So that's, we've had a busier week than expected and more to talk about than expected.
Yeah, I mean, we knew it was all going to happen this week and early next week. Like there's that gap after the season ends where, other than just watching the rest of the playoffs play out, not a whole lot happens. Yeah. And then everything happens right in this 1 week and a half crunch period.
Yeah, that's why we got to take our vacation before that. I timed it out okay, I think. I mean, I wish I didn't go, but anyway, I think we're good to wrap it up, right, Scott?
Yep. If people missed Bridget's vacation horror story, that's at the end of the previous episode.
Yes, it is. Yes, I should have stayed home. All right. Well, I will sign off. We will talk to you again right after the draft. So we'll see you then.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.